Francois, thanks for being on the show, man. I've like so many questions, and I'm really happy that Kevin made the introduction.
Yeah.
In preparation, like I was reading your blog, like just looking at your past. One thing that struck out to me is that you seem to be really good at learning. So I guess my question is, how did you learn to learn?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think my one of the unfair advantages that I maybe had when I was a kiddo is that I had a lot of imagination and I was always into books. Like I would read S ton of books and I would also write a lot. So like, for instance, I would read like Dungeon and Dragons book where there was some dragon wars going on in the sky and whatever. And like for a weekend after, I would maybe write some dragon stories with the same characters, but like just my own spin on it. So that kind of combo of reading a lot and writing a lot, I think is kind of one of the best ways to learn because you take in words at your own rhythm and then to make sure you understood correctly you kind of write about that stuff and you see so am I able to explain it to myself and to some other peeps that are going to read that so I'd say that's kind of how I learn.
Yeah, that's really, we were talking about before, about like our respective blogs and how it's like really just a mechanism to like
Oh yeah.
think better. So maybe a more micro question, what are you currently learning about or want to learn about? Like obviously we're going to talk about Snipcart and your role as CEO.
Yeah.
So it could be related to work or maybe also just personal.
Okay. So like I've been interested in mental health for a while for some personal reasons, and just like I think on a more collective level, there's a lot of suffering happening wherever you are in the world, and I think it's like the brain and all of the emotions that are happening within are like the first and most important tool any entrepreneur or people have. And once that stuff kind of breaks apart, well, everything else breaks apart. So your business, your friends, your relationships, your health, your whatever. So kind of understanding a bit more about psychology, a bit more about like the inner discourse we have with ourselves, how you can reframe some like cognitive distortions. I'm kind of always interested in that like mental health, well-being kind of stuff. So I read about this, I write about this. I'm very much interested in like startups. So especially bootstrapped part of the community. So I'm listening to a whole bunch of podcasts about how to build startups, what are the trends we're seeing in the industry, what types of funding are available for bootstrappers who don't want to go the VC route, how to think about what a business is, like what it is you're doing with it and who you're doing it with. Since I stepped up as CEO, I try to take some time to conceptualize that stuff and not just like be me heads down in operations crunching some work. So business, mental health, and I'm learning to be a boyfriend. Like, I mean, I'm in a serious relationship. It's the first time I've ever had a very committed, serious, long-term relationship. And in the middle of a pandemic, I am blessed not to be alone, but it also comes with some like challenges. So, how to live with someone else, and it kind of it makes me learn a lot more about my own um, challenges or quirks as a person to be with someone else because like you see yourself saying stuff and doing stuff and reacting to stuff and you're like, oh yeah, I'm not good with compromising. I should like so I'm trying to learn that too. Yeah.
I was gonna say I could give you some relationship advice, but I don't know if that's the point of the show. That,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
honestly, I don't think I'd be the expert. But
yeah.
actually, there is a tie-in. Like you're speaking about, relationship. Like I've been in a marriage for a long time, so I was gonna
Okay.
say I could maybe give you a few pointers. But it does go back to your first point about mental health, where it's like
Yeah.
knowing a bit about yourself. And I
Oh yeah,
think as your mental health has a repercussion on other people. So curious if
for
you
sure.
if you have any books or any insights, along this journey that you want to share, that you think in the last little while that you've discovered.
Yeah. So Monkey Mind is, I think it's a dude from the Atlantic or some journalist writer who suffered from like hardcore anxiety, and he wrote a book about it. Like, and I mean, he's a great person. He wrote and did some great stuff, and he's kind of, this is how I dealt with it, and this is what it looked like. I really liked that. Any apps or like beginner books on CBT, so that's cognitive behavioral therapy. I think these are great resources. That's how I started like making progress in therapy, and then everything that has to do with mindfulness, and not necessarily in a woo-woo sense or whatever, just like learning to sit still with your mind, learning to meditate, learning that there is a space between you as a person, as a consciousness, and your emotions and your thoughts, and like in that space there is room for like acting or not acting upon these stuff. So kind of kind of learning not to define yourself by your like weaknesses or challenges mentally. Like I'm not an anxious dude. I'm not a depressed person. I'm just I'm just a guy. And sometimes these things happen to me. But we are multitudes. We're many things. So yeah, I guess these are kind of starters.
Yeah, I think we're going to tie it also to your third point. Sorry, I'm kind of like my brain's also bouncing all over the place. I find with it, with this intro is like you spoke about mental health and its importance. I think particularly during these times,
Yeah.
and then you seem also super passionate and knowledgeable about startups. And I
Yeah.
find one of the things I've learned, like running a small company, is you learn more about yourself and what you're good at and what you're not good at, and you have all these preconceived notions once you
Yeah.
start, and then you realize like kind of reality smacks you and kind of like you realize what you're good at, what you're not good at really quickly. And I think there's a tie into mental health, because then you realize, oh shit, like you're always questioning yourself. There's always
Uh-huh.
this notion
Uh-huh.
of the imposter syndrome, which is a bit big. So I've had to deal with a lot of this.
Yeah, same.
So yeah, I feel like there is a tie-in also to startups, as to like it is this journey of self-discovery to a large extent, like running a company, what it means, understanding, you have to lead people,
Yeah.
like show the example. And sometimes like you don't feel that you're right at the example, at least in my
Oh, yeah.
case. So I don't know, kind of like je divague, as they say, like in terms of subject, but maybe to talk a little bit about startups, because I think we are going to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, what are you looking at in terms of startups? So like I like this movement you spoke about, bootstrap and how to do it, because there's a lot of glamour around the whole VC side. I think it's still very much the case.
Yeah.
So you feel there's more of this grassroots appeal now
Yeah.
for bootstrapping, right? Where it's like you have the tools that are available. Maybe you don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to have, that person looking over your shoulder, i.e. the VC boss that tells you what to do. So curious to hear about
Yeah.
the bootstrap philosophy.
Well, I think nobody should have as a life goal or a KPI, I got featured on TechCrunch. Like, this is just if you have enough connections and relationships, and you're a good salesman, saleswoman, you can raise money and be featured on TechCrunch. Like, it's not an accomplishment in and of itself. I don't have a problem with venture backed businesses. I think it's all about like the people who raise these millions of dollars. Are they good people? Are they building something cool that is valuable for their respective community, or like changing the market? And is that a journey that is stretched through time? Like, or is that just like a quick thing that extinguishes very rapidly? And I think, unfortunately, it's more high risk, high growth, fast paced. So in that sense, the dynamics of raising capital might lead to more failures, but like the fewer victories are much more bigger in scope. So it's a weird dynamic. But for me, as a bootstrapped company, I think there's a lot of things that, to tie it back to mental health also. There are a lot of things that give you more control and luxury, not in the material sense, over like your lifestyle and how you decide to work, who you decide to work with, when you decide to work. And this is for me very important because like I'm not a very constant guy. Like I have like my productivity and moods. They're in like they used to be like this when I was young, and now I'm just like um, coasting on a smaller waves. And I like the flexibility to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to ship this thing right now because it's not like there's no like pressing goal of like growth and a checklist of features that if you don't have this by next quarter, you're not going to be able to get such and such deals, and you're going to start like this kind of pressure just doesn't exist. The only pressure, if you will, that we have is like, okay, so are we making more money? The customers that we're getting, are we keeping them? Like, are they happy? And the people we're working with, our teammates, do they are they growing? Are they happy? And that's the pressure, and that's a much more healthy pressure and much more simple relationship with your work and your business. And you know, I'm the anxious type, and I have problems with authority. So having like um, people with high stakes and high influence around me telling me like a, a bit what they think I should be doing and what are the milestones I should be crossing and everything. Like I don't think like it's in my DNA, and most of the team's DNA also, you know. So it's kind of like, what are your own constraints? What's your style, and just embrace it. Like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I find it's a very wise point you bring, Francois, right? Like you build a team around you, and like obviously they tend to be a little bit, they have similarities and cultural traits that are very similar to you. And I think to the broader point, I think the hamster wheel of always having to grow the 10x all the time,
yeah,
I think it's made for everyone, and also I don't think it's also necessarily that healthy. Like I find that I like you said, it's not something negative, but I think it takes a certain type of person. And then also I think to the TechCrunch point, there's a lot of bodies in the graveyard you don't hear about, right? Like for all the the companies that belly up, and you have to applaud them just as well because they just didn't
yeah,
succeed.
for sure.
Probabilities of success end up being quite low, but you only hear about like the success stories, obviously, right? And I find it's also mistied with funding, as if funding by itself is a milestone. Of course, it's a great a
Yeah,
sign of success, but ultimately that's not what taking money from someone else means you've diluted yourself. So it's great, but so it's like I think there's the but that's missing in the conversation, right? So like, is the
mm,
company on the right track? Are you actually really achieving goals? And then to your point,
mm,
happiness is not always considered in that. So maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about Snipcart, and I'd love to hear more about your the philosophy that you guys have built over there. Maybe just as quick intros, like what is Snipcart? What do you guys do?
yeah, sure. So Snipcart is a developer-first e-commerce solution. We launched in 2013. Yeah, and back then it was a lot of Shopify and Magento and uh, very powerful but monolithic solutions, and developers in that ecosystem weren't quite happy because they lacked flexibility. So at that time we kind of we launched inside a web development agency, and there was a client that was in need of e-commerce, but he had a whole website with like a dusty code base that the folks didn't want to touch back then. So, and he didn't have a lot of budget, but he was one of the first clients. So we kind of started. They kind of started, because I wasn't there in the very first beginning. They kind of started saying, how could we bypass that stack and allow the website to be transactional anyway? So Charles, the co-founder and creator of Snipcart, he kind of said, why? What if like most of the e-commerce logic and parts were in the front end, like in the layer that all websites share, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. So that's kind of what Snipcart became. It's very lightweight, customizable e-commerce solution. You add a JavaScript snippet, just like you would do with a Google Analytics tag, if you will, on a website. And then on some buttons or HTML elements on your site, you say, this is a product, that's the price, that's all the data attributes you need. And then you click that button and Snipcart pops on your website, and you can complete a whole transaction. So whatever the CMS, the JavaScript frameworks, the static site generators, whatever you're using to build that site, as long as you add Snipcart to that layer of the client, the front end, it's going to work.
Yeah, it seems like you guys are following this trend, this broader trend in e-commerce of headless. If and correct me here if I'm wrong. It's
Yes,
similar, not exactly the same, but it's disassociating the back end and the front end essentially.
yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, headless is like it's like gaining momentum on two fronts right now. You have headless CMSs, which are the gist of it. The gist of it is like um, your content, the data that will be on your website is separated from the presentation layer, how it will look and be styled. So you manage all the content in the headless CMS, and then you use some type of front end framework to present it and skin it on the client side. And you talk through an API between those two parts. There's something similar is happening in e-commerce where you see headless e-commerce. And that's kind of the same logic in a sense where your product data, so the name of the product, its price, its weight, its location, its product options, everything, its price, it's going to be living inside of a dedicated backend, if you will, that that offers you a bunch of APIs and a bunch of ways to push that product data into different front ends. So the more classic one is a website. So just like similar to the first scenario we described, but you can also like with the real good ones, you can also push product information and make them shoppable on like, I don't know, a native mobile app, some smart screens, TVs, voice agents, chat agents. So there's a whole bunch of funky stuff you can do, and that's a trend in and of itself. And I believe there's value in it. I also believe like it has a load of buzzword clout or whatever. Like many e-commerce merchants do not actually need to be selling on all of the funky touch points I was just telling you about. They just need a good websites that works well, so Snipcart, in that sense, you wouldn't say Snipcart is purely headless because there is a notion of decoupling the products and the e-commerce from the website in Snipcart, but it's not decoupling the e-commerce data and having it stored like in a dedicated backend database and then pushing it somewhere else. Like we kind of work a bit of the other way around. I don't know if you want to get in the weeds here, but yeah, these days, so since headless e-commerce is becoming popular and we're kind of in the Jamstack headless e-commerce space, people often think, hey, so you're fully headless. And I'm like, no, not exactly. Like we give some separation of concerns, but not on the same level.
it's so thanks for clarifying. First off, as you can tell, I'm not the most technical guy, but that really explained kind of like what is headless versus Jamstack. But it still falls along the same more macro trend of empowering the user, right? Which is before it was more of a monolith, right? So if you
Of
work with
course,
more
yes.
classic
Oh
solutions,
yeah.
so it seems that you guys are ahead of the wave even more so. So what does it feel to be so in advance of the trends and that, like that you guys started the company, like 5 7 years ago now?
Hmm.
So
Well,
feels like you're now starting to take advantage of this trend that's coming to fruition. And correct
hmm.
me if I'm asking it with a wrong lens.
No, I think like so the distinction between like pure headless and Snipcart, like it's decoupling, but not the same type of decoupling. And I can give more details in another format on another channel, whatever. I did a video about this. We could maybe link it somewhere. So the thing is with Jamstack as a paradigm, as a modern way to build sites and apps, um, it really focuses on the front end and on modularity, API economy, static generation as much as possible, using the right tool for the right jobs, that kind of stuff. These things grew in popularity and like kind of crystallized into a movement that we baptized the Jamstack. But like go back to 2013, this stuff was not happening. And the reason why Snipcart was created to live mostly in the front end and to be very agnostic regarding your tech stack choices was not because like we were pioneers and geniuses that said, "Oh, this is how the web will be developed in 5 years." It's just a constraint that we had at the time. And then when we were trying to get traction and trying to nail our acquisition channels, we realized that there was this front end revolution that was happening. And like front end developers through JavaScript, through single page applications, framework like React, and more simple but solid tools like static site generators, they were very much empowered and created more and were more sought after. So we kind of said, wait a minute, like Snipcart only lives in your front end. Whatever you use to generate it, if you want to use all of these tools and maybe have most of your content and logic and whatever living in the front end, you don't need a database to run e-commerce. You can just use Snipcart because it lives in the front end. So we kind of started doing marketing experiments and content around that stuff, and there was a natural fit between this approach, this more front end centric approach to building the web, and Snipcart. So in a sense, we got lucky, but when we realized that luck, we kind of owned it. You know, we worked for it and we contributed to the community, and we said we kind of gave exposure to new tools and new people building these early tools in the ecosystem. And fast forward years later, it paid off both on a traffic SEO level, but mostly on a branding level, where people are like, well, if you want to do lightweight e-commerce with any stack to build a website, and you want to separate a bit of your content, you go with Snipcart, right? So there's a lot of brand recognition that came from all of these efforts. But in the spirit of being just honest, I always say that there's a strong part of luck that was involved in like us being in that community, in that like forefront.
Yeah. Well, I believe a lot in the expression, you have to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good. So uh,
Yeah.
I think it's a good sign that you do recognize there's a part of it. Maybe give us a sense of Snipcart's scale today. So like how many customers, how many developers, just
So the team in and of itself is still very small. We are 8 people. So there's 5 developers, 1 marketer, 1 product owner, and me. And we're we're actually looking to hire someone in marketing if you're listening to this and you're interested. So that's the team. We have around 3,000 paying customers across the world. Um, and then we have like a few thousands more accounts that are experimenting on trial or whatever. We Last year we first crossed the 1 million annual recurring revenue bar, so it was a very cool milestone for the team. And just all of that is we're still profitable and there's money left at the end of the year. So for us, it was a big source of pride for the partners and the team and everyone. And yeah, that's the very big picture. We transact, we process between 7 and 10 millions, if I recall correctly, per month across all of our 3,000 merchants that I said. Yeah.
yeah. And what's the business model? Is it a flat fee per transaction? Is it a SaaS per usage? How do you guys charge your customers?
Yeah. So it's kind of mostly SaaS, but hybrid in terms of there's a minimal fixed fee that is charged, but if you and then there's a 2% transaction fee. So for now, that is the pricing, but it's bound to change soon. We're gonna release like tiers where the flat fee varies and the percentage varies depending on volume and that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah,
It's interesting. It makes me think back to like Shopify, where they were early days, there was, there's a transaction fee and then you switched to just entirely SaaS.
yeah,
And it was a big unlock for them, but I like how you guys are experimenting with it, right? It's also not the same point in time in the industry, right? Like it's 15 years
yeah. But
later.
I mean, they're a leader in so many ways, and I used to dismiss Shopify because I thought we were like competing against them, and then at one point it was like, yeah, in some cases like people choose Snipcart over Shopify or Shopify over Snipcart, but in the bigger scheme of things, the e-commerce pie is so humongous, and they want to take a lot of it, and that's fine. We just want to, our small part, and we're very good with it. So I'm like inspired by some of the things they do, and I don't know. I think I'm proud that they are a Canadian company. like taking on freaking Amazon. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive.
Oh
Right
yeah.
out of sleepy Ottawa. Um, so to play devil's advocate for 1 second, right? Like you mentioned the huge opportunity, right? Like that the market's huge. It's also, I think, what the pandemic has showed is that this e-commerce thing is just getting started, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So why not consider like additional sources of capital to just like put this thing on steroids? Because it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like you hit that famous, the hate to they use the startup product market fit, but it does really appear that you have thousands of
Yeah.
customers, you have people all over the world that would benefit from this.
Oh
Isn't
yeah,
it
yeah.
isn't it incumbent on you as a CEO to say, listen, like, I don't know if it's me, I don't know if it's someone else, but this thing is bigger than just us today, and more people can benefit from it. So what's your rationale in keeping it bootstrapped?
That's a great question. So okay, since we were early in the, let's say, modern e-commerce space, and that's now called Jamstack or Headless, depending on how you look at it. Since we were early there, our position kind of as pioneers and go-tos strengthened over time. Today, many people who come into the space and look at Snipcart and the presence we have over the web, they will assume Snipcart is either a funded company or a much larger company than it is. So this comes with like expectations about uh, feature release velocity, support time, delays, integrations and partnerships with key players in the space, and all that jazz. And this gap in like our actual position and the perception of some people in the market, this has like created a lot of anxiety for me in the beginning of the year. I was like, okay, so e-commerce is booming. We have lots of people who are willing to invest and that are reaching out to me all the time. The category in itself, so Jamstack and Headless, is exploding. Um, like, am I missing out? Are we missing out? Like, should we be like bridging that gap I mentioned through VC and all of like the money and the knowledge and the network that comes with it? And I had discussions with different venture capitalists. I had discussions with founders who raised money and founders who decided not to raise money. And I don't know. I thought about it a lot because I have a roadmap that is like stacked with projects and features and marketing experiments, and I'm like, yeah, I think I could spend these millions, but but at the end of the day, I kind of got back to what it is that I want to live as a life, what kind of life do I want to live as an entrepreneur? What kind of life does our team want to live as like devs and marketers and whatnot? And is it like would raising capital help us live that life? And the answer became no. And it's not like, I mean, we're a profitable business. We're growing every year. We grew like 120% last year. We're mostly happy and mostly stress free when we work. So that's like crazy to me because you spend the most of your adult life, waking adult life, like working. If you're not like enjoying it and having fun and cracking jokes and shooting the shit with your teammates, you're missing out on a big part. Even if you're banking and like doing crazy projects during nights and weekends, if the majority of your time is spent in something you kind of about, I think it's weird. But I totally respect it, by the way. It's just some people don't think the same way. So yeah, it wasn't a match with like our lifestyle choices, our my psych profile, and like I am an ambitious person, but I'm also I'm a fan of a certain level of comfort and slow pace. I like that stuff. So
I respect that answer a lot, Francois. So yeah, like I think eventually you can maybe try and find a strike a balance. I've
maybe.
seen companies go down that route that have it hasn't been necessarily been the question of stress. I think it's the question of partners. Like bringing someone on the cap table. It's like you have another partner, you have someone you're married with, right? So it's like how is it going to work? But yeah, it's like huge respect to what you guys are building. Maybe I'd like to
And
pick
like,
your brain. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, there's a quote of Bob Dylan kind of says something like, "I wake up in the beginning of the day, I'm someone, and I go to sleep and I'm someone else." And I'm for better or worse, I'm very much like this. So like, I know this is recorded, and like, if future Frank decides to raise some kind of money again, like, this is the disclaimer that I might change my mind. I
But you
don't,
said the
yeah,
timestamp.
and there are new alternative funding options right now: Tiny VC, Indie.vc, Tiny Seed, Indie.vc, Earnest Capital. Like, there's like financing per like revenue. There's a whole bunch of weird stuff you can do to get a bit more money, go a bit more faster, but not do the like Hail Mary all in like big VC route.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It would be, I'd be remiss to not to ask you about what's next, right? So it seems like you guys have been ahead of the curve. So what do you think is next in that in the space, right? So, or another way to ask the question is, what do you think is happening that doesn't have enough attention that's going to grow over time?
Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so uh, the first answer is like, headless e-commerce is here to stay for a while at least. But remember that this is it's a way of doing things that separates things. So it's kind of an unbundling, if you will. And that is like fragmentation in SaaS. We've seen this like going to that side of the pendulum for years now, where you had like micro SaaS and like a feature becomes a SaaS, right? Um, but now in some areas, you're kind of seeing that pendulum swing back to bundling, not necessarily just unbundling. So Notion, for instance, there's a whole bunch of different products that are living in some ways inside one that is Notion. So is there going to be a fatigue somewhere in the Jamstack space or the headless e-commerce space, where you're using the best tool for the job, but you're using like 13 tools, and you're kind of tired of like switching between all of that stuff? Is it gonna I don't know. Is there going to be some kind of a reckoning there? Maybe. Is that going to be bad for Snipcart? Maybe. Maybe we can integrate more into another platform. I don't know. So there's this kind of that I'm trying to see how it shifts. For e-commerce in particular, the attraction that you mentioned regarding Jamstack and headless, and that new way of building the web, it generated tons of investment. And if you couple this with the macro trend of the COVID pandemic, it's just crazy. As soon as you're doing e-commerce and in a like novel way, you have like you can get millions, right? So I see all of these players popping up out of nowhere, or old players rebranding themselves, and I'm like, hmm, let's see who makes the best out of all of these millions. Like, I'm kind of laid back and just watching like what they do. Are they doing cool stuff? Will they really shake the industry or just disappear? I don't know. It's interesting to watch. Um, yeah. So that's for to finish on the e-commerce part. We now have a very much more vibrant creator and entrepreneur economy online, like online creators who sell digital products, who sell courses, who sell resources, all of that stuff. And this is super fascinating to me, because it kind of reduces like the business side to an individual, and then you can get into the funky stuff about sovereign individuals and like crypto anarchy and whatever. But like, this is super interesting. So in some ways, I feel like Snipcart is very, very close to developers, and developers are like one of the most interesting tribe of humans right now, because you can speak to them in English and they will like translate it into future. Like they'll write code and like make the future happen. And a lot of people want that power. So there's an inside economy of developers selling learning resources and teaching other developers. So that in and of itself is a market. And I feel like Snipcart is very close and has like developer love capital. So there are maybe some ways we could like position ourselves to empower developers even more than just doing e-commerce. So that's one thing that's on my mind these days. And then I got a few notes. Like, two of the other stuff I wanted to mention is like no code and Bitcoin. They're totally different. No code is super interesting because it's kind of it presents itself as the reckoning that we were thinking about back in the like 5 years ago when we had the what was the name of the startup who made like some AI website generator that you could just like almost write stuff or talk to it and it would generate the grid or something like that. Anyway, so this didn't work out like at all. But at that time, when that kind of stuff came out, everyone was like, so developers and agencies that are building simple websites are gonna go out of a job. Like, and clearly this did not happen. But with the no code movement, that's kind of one of the promises or uh, one of the advantages for people is to say like, listen, I'm a smart person. I do not know how to code. I do not want to learn how to code, but I can patch things together. I can understand business logic. I can like learn to click here and click there and do whatever. So I can build a whole business intelligence or business process without writing code. Um, so that's very interesting. But the question is, are these ventures, no code ventures, are they going to scale? Are we going to see like incredible success stories that come from a no code setup, if you will? And that's going to question my partner asked me, George, and I was like, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what's happening with that. So I kind of try to keep an eye on this. I think it's interesting.
I was going to say we could debate this on just 1 hour. Like I
Oh
find the
yeah,
no-code movement it's so fascinating. I kind of agree that I think it's going to help. I think what it'll do, maybe my own 2 cents, is that it'll help companies go faster. So you can experiment, fail on a
yeah,
much more rapid rate, and then at a certain scale, well, then yes, you'll need to like use a Twilio, or you need to use something. You'll need actual developers
yeah.
that help
Amen.
you
Yeah,
build something custom, but the number of shots on goal will increase, which I think is phenomenal because then you have many more products, a lot more options available. But I think we've seen some of these companies by themselves at scale, right? Like Zapier, I think is already like a $50 million company, if not more. There's a bunch that the companies in this no code movement that have hit a certain scale by themselves.
yeah. And like Webflow is a great example. And but what you said about like experimenting and building initial versions of products, this is like crazy empowering because we're part of a like loosely part of a startup program, startup guiding program. What's it? Incubator kind of stuff in Quebec City that's called Apollo 13, so Apollo 13, and like a lot of founders come into that program and they're like, I can't code, but like I know this industry in and out. I'm passionate. I'm like devoted and everything. And like sometimes they feel like they have to have a developer involved, or but if you just channel the energy that they have in their minds into like no code tools, they can build crazy awesome MVPs and maybe raise some money or just make a bit of money and then hire a developer. Yeah, so I think it might like position itself in the one early part of the entrepreneurial journey, that whole no code thing. um yeah, that's
And
yeah.
then you mentioned one more.
Oh,
You said
Bitcoin.
yes.
Yeah. Well, it kind of like almost like tacky to talk about Bitcoin just because the price is going up, so like
Well,
everybody
not
like,
every day, not this week.
yeah, no, well, right. Correct. So I got introduced to Bitcoin years before it was more mainstream, let's say. And it's funny because it was like one of our best friends in the crew, and way back in the days, he had like advised us to put money into some weird stock about like a cell phone technology and whatever. And we were very young and broke, and we all put like, I don't know, a couple of dozens of bucks, and we lost everything, right? So this thing didn't pan out. And then, like a couple of years later, he comes back to us and he's like, "Guys, you gotta put money into Bitcoin. It's gonna change the world. It's like the biggest thing since the internet." And we were like, "Dude, f off! Like last time you told us to invest in something." So, but, but, but most of us listened to him. It took a while because like, and he just kept at it. Like he kept
Who's your
coming.
friend? Can you name drop? Who's your friend? What's his name or her name?
Yeah, man, it's it's Alex Burge. So on Twitter, he's he's very aggressive about Bitcoin and everything.
I'm gonna follow him.
It's
But
Burge
yeah, continue,
Alex
continue the
or
story.
Yeah, he's awesome. But yeah, whatever. Um, so he ended up being kind of our Bitcoin guru, and like it, the thing about Bitcoin is it's not just like a financial asset that you like bet on or try to make money out of it. It's like a freaking paradigm shift, and that's the most interesting thing about Bitcoin. It's not about money. It's certainly about the tech. Like, how does it exist in such a unique and like foolproof way? That's just crazy in and of itself. But it's about what does it imply for humanity and like economies, and how things can change if like things are decentralized and not controlled by one central government with all. It's just crazy, and I believe it. I do think it's the biggest thing since the internet. So if the price is kind of the gateway drug into the rabbit hole that is Bitcoin, so be it. Like, I mean, but like learn about it. Like, read the white paper Satoshi wrote, and like there's like some freaking interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's funny you mentioned Bitcoin. I'm having a guest on this week to talk about Bitcoin.
Okay,
Someone who's
nice.
very bullish on Twitter, but I won't release the name just yet because we haven't recorded. But yeah, I totally agree with you. And I find that for me, it's also I also got not got caught up, but I was exposed to it like in 2012 or something. And I'm like,
Got it.
what are we talking about? What is this thing? And then like obviously over time, it's only grown in importance. You mentioned the tech piece, but I find it's the philosophy piece that is most
Oh yeah.
endearing, right? Like there's, people say, yeah, it's fake, but people believe in it. But it's like, obviously, the US dollar is also fake. People believe in it. And I
Yeah, yeah,
find
yeah. Money is a story.
yeah, exactly. So it's a
Money
story,
is a
but
story. We
yeah. But I find the story of Bitcoin and the fact of its pseudonymous founder, actually,
oh
it's all the power lies
yes.
there, right? So imagine the founder is like some dude Bob, in Sacramento. It's like I started, but the fact that this person that started, made this statement of
Yeah,
I'm not gonna release my name. It's this
that's
pseudonym.
crazy.
It makes the whole story because of no one
Yeah.
owns it, right? So the whole notion of it being decentralized, even Vitalik, where it's like everyone loves Vitalik. Like, I don't understand how anyone cannot like, Vitalik. He's just like the smartest, the dude, like seems the most kind and gentle, but it's still a person. It's still, like it's not this mythical figure that is Satoshi, right? So I find that's an element that's
Uh-huh.
it's underappreciated in the sense that in the story and the
Mhm.
power of Bitcoin is the fact that it doesn't belong to anyone,
And
really.
and like the lore of Bitcoin, the genesis of Bitcoin, what happened with Silk Road, how it was used for like shady stuff in the beginning, the kind of FBI weird stuff that happened with all these stories. Like this genesis is just crazy good. Like Burge would tell us like we're gonna make movies out of this, and we're gonna be like we were there, like we were reading the news and we saw the guy get arrested and blah blah. So yeah, like
I think they already have. I read the book about Silk Road. I forget the name of the book.
it's
I think, but
American Kingpin or something
yeah,
like that.
American Keep It. Yeah, exactly. And I think they're making a movie or made a movie. But yeah, I agree. I think one piece though on the like the criminal front is all new technologies are almost first adopted by criminals, right? Like cell phones when they came out, like a
Yeah,
lot of like underground people had it because it was like a new way, and it's like, but now it's clearly like you don't necessarily want a currency that is completely trackable, right? So it's like obviously people are probably using it for nefarious reasons, but so the US dollar as well. So
no,
I don't buy into the whole it's for criminal story, at least not anymore.
no,
But yeah,
it's a way for incumbent systems to protect themselves and cast a shadow over something that's new. But like people buy cocaine with American dollars
yeah.
every day.
Frank, I think we could talk about a million subjects. I respect your time. A final question would be is where people can connect with you, find out more, learn about Snipcart.
Yeah. So my email is Francois at snipcart.com. On Twitter, I am the underscore FLN, so THE underscore FLN. And snipcart.com is our website if you want to check it out. Yeah, I'll reiterate, we're looking for someone in marketing, digital marketing. If you're interested, you can reach out. I'll probably release a video saying that we're looking for that person. And yeah, I mean, I got so many notes, but maybe we do this another time because it's just so much stuff to talk about.
We need a round two for sure,
Yeah.
Francois. Honestly, this is really interesting. I just want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.